My name is Harper Quinn, and I am 22 years old. After the biggest win of my career in Denver, I flew home expecting hugs, maybe a cake, definitely some kind of pride from the people who raised me. Instead, I found something that stopped my heart cold. My clothes were crammed into black garbage bags and dumped on the curb outside our house. My father stood beside them, arms folded, his face like stone. "You're 22 now," he said. "It's time you stood on your own 2 feet." Next to him, my older brother nodded along. Like the two of them had rehearsed this moment for weeks. My hands were shaking, but I forced my face still. They had waited until I was 1,000 miles away to erase me from the family. Without saying a word, I picked up my laptop bag, got in my car, and drove off while their voices still rang in my ears. 3 months later, my phone would light up with 51 missed calls and one text from my mother that read simply, "Please call me. What changed? Why did they suddenly need me? If you were in my position, would you go back? Or would you keep walking? Tell me in the comments. I would love to hear what you think." I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, in a house where every room seemed to hum with expectations I could never meet. My father, Gerald Quinn, ran a small insurance office and carried himself like every conversation was a negotiation he intended to win. My mother, Diane, taught piano lessons out of our living room, soft-spoken until she wasn't, and her quiet comments could cut deeper than any shout. Then there was my brother, Tyler, 6 years older than me, the golden child before I even knew what that phrase meant. By the time he turned 28, Tyler had a corporate job downtown, a nice apartment, and a fiancée everyone adored. His name was spoken at every dinner like a hymn. I was the daughter who chose a coding job at a small tech company instead of a real career. And in my parents' eyes, that made me the disappointment. Every Sunday dinner followed the same script. My father would mention some new milestone of Tyler's, then look at me and ask why I couldn't aim that high. My mother would agree in her softer voice, saying things like, "Your brother's already settled. Harper, what are you doing with your life?" I would grip my fork and nod, swallowing the words I wanted to say. My job wasn't glamorous. I spent long nights debugging software for a small app that was barely off the ground. But it was mine, and I believed in it. I had graduated from a state university with a degree in computer science. But to my parents, my student loans were proof I had failed, not proof I had tried. Tyler had a scholarship. His path had always been paved in praise. Living at home after college wasn't a choice. It was survival. Rent in Columbus was climbing fast, and my starting salary barely covered my monthly loan payment, let alone an apartment. I paid $300 a month to my parents for staying in my childhood bedroom, kept the refrigerator stocked, mowed the lawn every weekend, and drove my mother to her errands whenever her car acted up. None of it seemed to matter. In their eyes, I was still the one leeching off their kindness, never the one holding the house together. My father had opinions about everything. My friends, my clothes, the hours I kept. "You're wasting your time with those tech people," he would mutter, scrolling on his phone while I cooked dinner for the family. My mother wasn't any easier, texting me if I stayed out past 10 at night, demanding to know where I was and who I was with. Meanwhile, my friends were renting apartments, dating freely, building lives with no one checking in on their every move. I envied them quietly, stuck comparing myself to a brother who could do no wrong. Tyler wasn't just their favorite. He was their whole future. They spent hours discussing his plans to build a tech startup, something he described as revolutionary, though none of us really understood what it did. My father's eyes would light up whenever Tyler mentioned words like venture capital or seed funding. "That's my boy," he would say, clapping him on the back. Meanwhile, my own ideas. Features I had pitched for the app I actually worked on. Features that were already boosting real numbers. Never earned a second glance. One evening, I overheard my parents talking quietly in the living room about an opportunity they needed to fund. When I asked what they meant, my mother waved me off. "It's not your concern," she said. The secrecy unsettled me, but I let it go. Too tired to fight for information, I assumed I wasn't entitled to. Growing up, the comparisons never stopped. Tyler was the debate captain, the top of his class, the one who could do no wrong. I loved coding because I loved solving puzzles. Not because it came with prestige. But my average grades and unconventional choices were treated like character flaws. When I chose a smaller state school over a bigger name, my mother sighed and said, "Your brother aimed higher." When I took the tech job instead of a corporate desk job, my father shook his head and called it throwing away stability. Every choice I made was measured against Tyler's path. And I always came up short. I tried anyway. I fixed the family Wi-Fi, paid my rent on time every month, helped however I could. But it felt like shouting into an empty room. Their love came with conditions I could never fully satisfy. The hardest nights were when Tyler visited. My mother would bring out her good dishes. My father would open a nice bottle of wine. And the two of them would hang on every word of Tyler's latest business update. I would sit there quietly, knowing that whatever I brought to the table would be ignored the moment his name came up. "Harper's still at that little startup," my mother said once, her tone dripping with pity. Tyler smirked and said, "Still chasing dreams." I wanted so badly to tell them about the feature I had built that our users loved. But the conversation had already moved back to him. My bedroom, with its creaky floor and faded curtains, was the only place in that house that felt like mine. I spent my nights there juggling loan payments that ate up nearly half of every paycheck. My job was a grind. Late nights, tight deadlines, constant pressure to help our small company outpace bigger competitors. But I loved it. I loved the feeling of turning lines of code into something that actually helped people. One week I fixed a bug that saved an important product demo. And my manager told me, "You're the reason this team works, Harper." I carried that compliment home like a trophy, hoping just once my family would notice. Instead, I got eye rolls from my father and silence from my mother. Money was a constant source of anxiety. My loan payments were non-negotiable, and any unexpected cost. A cracked phone screen, new work shoes, sent me scrambling. One night, I asked my mother if I could borrow $40 for a software subscription I needed for a work project. She didn't even look up from her magazine. "You should have planned better," she said. "Your brother never has these problems." I paid for it with a credit card I couldn't really afford to use. And my small pile of debt grew a little taller. It wasn't just about the money. It was the message underneath it I wasn't worth investing in. At work, I was proving myself in ways my family never noticed. Our team was small, barely a dozen people crammed into a converted office space. But I was given ownership of a major project, optimizing the search function inside our app. Work that could make or break our next round of funding. I stayed late night after night, adjusting algorithms until they finally clicked into place. When it worked, user engagement jumped by nearly 15%. My manager sent a message to the whole team praising my work by name. I printed that email out and brought it home, thinking maybe, just maybe, my father would care. At dinner, I slid it across the table. He skimmed it for 2 seconds and pushed it back. "That's not a real career," he said, cutting into his steak. "You need something stable. Like Tyler." My mother barely glanced at it, too busy scrolling through photos of Tyler's latest vacation with his fiancée. Tyler's cruelty could reach me even from a distance. One afternoon, I posted about a product update I was proud of on social media. Within the hour, he commented publicly, "Cute hobby. Harper, when are you getting a real job?" I deleted the post almost immediately, my face burning with embarrassment in front of coworkers and friends who had seen it. When I texted him asking why he had to say it like that, in front of everyone, he replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "Just keeping it real." The financial pressure at home only grew. My father began handing me portions of the household bills, electricity, internet, saying it was only fair since I still lived there. One month, he handed me a bill for $600 and said flatly, "Tyler doesn't burden us like this." I paid it, draining what little savings I had. Too tired to argue, I started tracking every dollar I spent on a spreadsheet, cutting anything that wasn't essential. No new clothes, no subscriptions, just work, bills, and survival. Work became the one place that felt fair. I was leading a critical feature for a major client. Testing, documenting, rewriting code late into the night to make sure nothing broke before launch. My manager trusted me with more responsibility than my own family ever had. But I would come home exhausted, only to face another lecture from my father about wasting my potential. Or another disappointed sigh from my mother. I started skipping family dinners just to avoid the tension. Eating alone in my room with headphones on. Working on side projects to keep my skills sharp. One night, through the thin wall, I overheard my father talking to a neighbor at a small gathering outside. "Harper's still finding her way," he said, his voice heavy with pity. "Not like Tyler. He's already set for life." I stood frozen in the hallway, my phone gripped tightly in my hand. I wasn't lost. I was building something real. Brick by brick. And they refused to see it. My chance to prove myself finally came when my manager chose me to lead a client pitch in Denver. Our company's app was on the edge of a breakthrough. And this meeting could secure the funding that would keep us alive for another year. I threw myself into preparation completely, rehearsing my presentation, memorizing every statistic, testing the demo until it ran flawlessly. "This is your moment, Harper," my manager told me the night before I left. "Show them everything you've got." The night before my flight, while I packed, my father called. "We're hosting Tyler's engagement party this weekend," he said without so much as a hello. "I need you to handle the catering and decorations when you get back." I told him I was flying out for a major pitch that could change everything for my career. He paused, then said simply, "That's fine. But the party matters. Tyler is counting on us." He never once asked about my trip. He just told me to be ready for the party and hung up. In Denver, I stood in a glass-walled conference room in front of a row of serious executives, my palms sweating but my voice steady. I walked them through every feature, every metric, every reason our product deserved their investment. Their questions came fast, but I answered every single one with confidence I didn't know I had until that moment. By the end, the lead executive leaned forward and said, "This is exactly what we've been looking for," before signing a deal worth $2.4 million. My manager grinned and clapped me on the shoulder. "You crushed it, Harper." This could mean a promotion. Walking out of that building, I let myself imagine telling my family. Maybe my father would finally look at me with something other than disappointment. Maybe my mother would put her phone down long enough to listen. Maybe Tyler would stop calling my work a hobby. I stopped at a small shop near the hotel and bought gifts. A pen for my father, a scarf for my mother, a journal for Tyler. Small things that I hoped might open a door between us. I texted my mother from the airport, "Signed a huge deal today." No reply came, but I told myself she was simply busy. On the flight home, I pictured every possible good outcome. I had no idea that the family I was so desperate to impress had already made plans of their own. Plans that would knock the breath out of me the moment I landed. The rideshare pulled onto my street, and my stomach dropped before I even understood why. Black garbage bags, at least a dozen of them, sat piled by the front gate. My clothes and keepsakes spilled out from torn openings, tied shut like trash. My father stood there with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Tyler stood beside him, jaw tight. I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady beneath me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You're a burden, Harper," my father said. "It's time for you to go." Tyler nodded beside him. "You're holding us back." I stared at the bags, my favorite sweater poking through a tear in the plastic. "You did this while I was gone," I said. "You didn't even tell me." "You're 22, my father said. Tyler was on his own years before this. I looked at my brother, hoping for some flicker of doubt, but he only shrugged. "Grow up, Harper," he said, and turned away. My mother wasn't there. Her absence said more than any words could have. They had waited until I was across the country to tear my life apart and hand it back to me in trash bags. A neighbor walking his dog slowed down, watching the scene with quiet curiosity. Shame burned across my face, but I forced myself to stand straight. I grabbed my laptop bag, the only thing they hadn't touched, and walked to my car. "You're really doing this," I said. "One last time." My father didn't answer. He simply turned back toward the house. Tyler muttered, "Good luck," in a voice completely empty of meaning. I drove without any destination in mind, tears blurring the streetlights as they passed. My phone buzzed somewhere in my bag. I let it ring. What could they possibly say now? I ended up calling my college friend, Nicole Bennett, my voice cracking as I explained everything. The bags, my father's words, the gate closing behind me for good. "Come to my place right now," she said, no hesitation in her voice. I pulled up to her small apartment with my back seat full of garbage bags and my eyes raw from crying. She pulled me into a hug the second she opened the door. "You're staying here," she said, already clearing a space on her couch. That night, I lay under a borrowed blanket, the weight of everything settling over me. My entire life reduced to a few plastic bags in the corner of someone else's living room. Nicole didn't push me to talk. She just made coffee the next morning and sat with me while I scrolled through rental listings I couldn't afford. My savings were thin, barely $2,000, and Columbus rent prices were unforgiving. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, squeezing my hand. "At work," I kept my head down, letting the code become a kind of anchor. A coworker named Marcus Webb, a designer on our team, noticed I had gone quiet during a meeting. Later that day, he asked if I was okay, and something in his voice made me finally tell the truth. My family, the bags, the couch I was sleeping on. His face softened immediately. "I know a landlord in the Grandview area who doesn't run credit checks if you can cover a higher deposit," he said. "Let me make a call." The studio he found me wasn't much. Peeling paint, a heater that rattled all night. But it was a start. Rent was $950 a month, with a deposit of $1,400. My savings barely covered it, and I knew the months ahead would be tight. Nicole helped me move in, dropping off a second-hand lamp and a few mismatched dishes. "You're tougher than you think," she said, stacking plates in my empty kitchen cabinets. I didn't have a bed at first. Just an air mattress, Nicole lent me. No prepare pots. No towels. Nothing but the essentials I could scrape together from the discount store down the street. I learned to cook rice and beans in bulk to stretch my grocery budget, and I taught myself, slowly, painfully. How to live without a safety net. My manager noticed how hard I was working and pulled me aside one afternoon. "You're carrying this team, Harper," he said. His words landed somewhere deep. A small bandage over a much bigger wound. Marcus checked in often, sending me listings for cheap furniture or just texting to see how I was holding up. "You don't have to go through this by yourself," he told me once, handing me an old chair his friend no longer needed. Between his quiet support and Nicole's steady presence, I slowly began to feel like I might actually make it. 2 weeks after I moved into the studio, a notification popped up on my phone from a real estate app. A listing caught my eye immediately. Our old family home, now under contract for $680,000. My hands went cold. The listing description mentioned a quick sale to help fund a promising family business venture. I felt sick. They were selling the house to bankroll Tyler's startup, and I had been left completely out of the decision. I remembered an email our family's lawyer had sent years earlier, after my grandfather's estate had been settled, stating clearly that the house was to be split evenly between me and Tyler once it was eventually sold. My claim wasn't a guess. It was documented. Yet somehow, they had moved forward without telling me a single thing. I called the realtor, a woman who had known our family for years. "I assumed you were aware," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "Your father signed everything about a week and a half ago. The buyers want to close quickly." My voice shook as I told her they had never said a word to me. "I'm so sorry," she said. But sorry didn't undo what had already been signed away. I called my father from a quiet corner of a coffee shop. "You're selling the house without telling me." He didn't even try to soften it. "It's for Tyler's company, Harper. A real opportunity." I laughed, bitter and disbelieving. "An opportunity? You used my inheritance to fund his app." His tone hardened instantly. "You've never contributed the way Tyler has. This is for the family's future." When I told him, the will gave me half. He cut me off completely. "The deal is done. Stop making this harder than it needs to be." Then he hung up. I tried my mother next, hoping for even a hint of regret. "Tyler needs this," she said flatly. "You'll manage." I asked her how she expected me to manage after they had sold my share without so much as a phone call. "We made a choice," she said. "Don't drag this out." I ended the call with my chest tight and my hands trembling. I texted Tyler, asking if he had known about the will and let it happen anyway. His reply came almost instantly. "My company matters more than your drama. Move on." When I told him he was taking what belonged to me, he sent back a shrugging emoji, as if my loss meant nothing at all. A month into my new life, my manager called me into his office. "Your work has been outstanding," he said. "We're promoting you to lead developer, with a 15% raise." I stood there stunned, doing the math in my head, realizing the extra income would finally let me breathe. For the first time after the N weeks, I felt like more than the daughter my family had thrown away. I started therapy on Marcus's recommendation, meeting with a counselor named Dr. Renee Foster, who specialized in family estrangement. I told her everything. The garbage bags, the stolen inheritance, years of feeling invisible. "None of this was ever about you," she said gently. "It was about their priorities, not your worth." Session by session, she helped me name what I was feeling and taught me how to set boundaries with people who had never earned my trust in the first place. I slowly began building a new life outside of work. I joined a local coding meetup where I met Priya Anand, a graphic designer with a talent for terrible puns and a genuine warmth that pulled me out of my shell. We started grabbing lunch together, and she introduced me to a wider circle of friends who knew nothing about my past and simply saw me for who I was becoming. Marcus and I grew closer too. Coffee turning into dinners. Dinners turning into long conversations about everything except my family. "You're stronger than you know," he told me one night. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. 6 months after I walked away, I stood in a small one-bedroom condo with the keys in my hand, having saved every extra dollar from my raise to finally afford my own place. It wasn't fancy. A tiny balcony, creaky floors, but it was entirely mine. Nicole helped me paint the walls a soft sage green. Marcus scouted secondhand furniture with me on weekends. Priya brought fairy lights for the balcony and hosted my housewarming party herself, raising a glass and saying, "To Harper, who built this from absolutely nothing." Work continued to thrive. A feature I had spearheaded boosted our app's downloads by nearly 20%, earning me recognition throughout the company. I had done it without a single word of encouragement from my family, and somehow that made it mean even more. I later heard, through a former neighbor, that my parents were renting a small apartment across town, their savings completely gone. The $680,000 from the house sale had disappeared into Tyler's failed company almost overnight, when a competitor launched a similar product first and investors pulled out. Tyler himself had lost his job and was reportedly working part-time at a coffee shop just to get by. I felt no joy in hearing it. But I felt no guilt either. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. 3 months into my new life, I was buried in a demanding sprint at work. My phone silenced in my bag for most of the day. When I finally checked it that evening, I found 51 missed calls from my mother and a single text, "Harper, please call me." My stomach tightened as I stepped outside to return the call. My mother's voice came through shaky and rushed. Tyler's company failed completely. We lost the house money. Everything. I asked her, coldly, why she was calling me now. "Your father didn't want to call," she admitted. "But we don't know what else to do." My father took the phone next. "We're struggling. Harper, we're still family." I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "Family, you threw me out. You sold my inheritance for Tyler's company. And now you need me," he argued that it had been for the family's future, that the business had seemed like a sure thing. I reminded him that he never told me, never asked me, never once thought of me as part of that future. "You've got a job," he said. "Help us out." I told him plainly that I wasn't going to fix a mess I had no part in creating. And I ended the call. That night I called Nicole and told her everything. "After what they did," she said without hesitation, "you don't owe them a single thing." I nodded, thinking of everything Dr. Foster had taught me about protecting my own peace. I had fought too hard to rebuild my life, to let their chaos pull me back into it. I opened my phone and, without much drama, blocked my mother's number, then my father's, then Tyler's. The screen went dark, and a strange, quiet relief settled over me. I wasn't anyone's safety net anymore. Not after everything they had done. A year after that day on the curb, I stood on my own balcony with morning light spilling across the floor, and I finally understood what I had actually built. It hadn't been easy, starting from nothing and clawing my way back to stability, but it had taught me who I really was. Self-reliance became the foundation of everything. Not just paying bills or fixing a leaky faucet, but trusting my own judgment for the first time in my life. I started writing about my experience online. Not for sympathy, but to reach anyone else who felt trapped by a family that refused to see them. The response surprised me. Messages poured in from strangers who had lived through something similar. People thanking me simply for putting their own experience into words. I began speaking occasionally at small community events about resilience and starting over. And each time, someone would come up afterward and say something like, "I needed to hear this today." My days now were full of purpose instead of chaos. At work, I led projects that shaped the direction of our entire app. At home, I cooked dinners with Marcus, laughed at Priya's terrible jokes, and slowly filled my condo with books, plants, and photographs of the new life I had built for myself. I heard, occasionally, through people who still lived near my old neighborhood, that my parents were still struggling, and that Tyler had never quite recovered his footing. I didn't reach out. I didn't feel the need to. Their choices had led them there, just as my choices had led me here. One evening, sitting on my balcony with Marcus beside me and the city lights spread out below, he squeezed my hand and said, "You've come so far." I nodded, feeling something settle inside me that had been unsettled for years. I hadn't just survived what my family did to me. I had built something entirely my own out of it. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to this to take away, it's this: self-reliance isn't just about surviving hard times. It's about choosing yourself every single day, even when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally fail to do so. Your story matters. No matter where you're starting from, keep going.